What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the team at Awesemo, talking some college football DFS ahead of New Year's Day. We have 5 games on the docket, but before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the video, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. First game we have here is Arkansas taking on Penn State. This game is a 48.5-point total, which is actually a little higher. It's midpoint of the slate in terms of the 5 games we have. 2.5-point spread in favor of Arkansas. Both teams fast. Arkansas prefers the run. Penn State, 55.5% pass rate, but overall low total in the game. KJ Jefferson at quarterback for Arkansas. Best trait is his mobility, 554 yards on the ground for him, averages 215 as a passer. Penn State's had plenty of opt-outs on the other side, so the matchup's certainly not as formidable as it once was, but Jefferson's really hard to stack this week. Traylon Burks is out, which means Warren Thompson, Tyson Morris, and Devion Warren should handle receiving duties for the most part. Tight end will be split between Blake Kern and Trey Knox. Outside of Traylon Burks, nobody has averaged more than 25.5 receiving yards per game. So you're literally just throwing pure darts on this passing attack. No idea who's going to step up here. So it's tough to get to. The backfield's also very difficult to get to with Traylon Smith, Raheem Sanders, and Dominic Johnson functioning as a 3-way committee. It's ebbed and flowed throughout the year too. So in a game with a 48.5 total, Arkansas applied for 25.5. With so much uncertainty and timeshares across the board, outside of Jefferson, this team's very difficult to get to. Penn State, you lost Jahan Dotson to opt out as well as many defenders, but Sean Clifford's still there at quarterback, somewhat mobile with 116 yards on the ground, averages 243 as a passer on 33 attempts. It's a difficult matchup against Arkansas's defense, and Clifford loses his top receiver. The difference is they just pass so much that these guys can luck their way into a lot of production, PPR value, touchdowns, things of that nature. And Dotson leaves behind 1,182 yards. That's 11.5 targets per game, a 33.5% target share. That's going to go to Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith primarily, 2 players that were already in every down roles. And Lambert-Smith in particular is 3,400. Phenomenal value there. They use 2 tight ends in Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson. Maybe they use more 12 personnel to ease the loss of Dotson, but you could also see more Cam Sullivan-Brown. They've had a little bit of a cameo appearance from, like Tyler Warren of late. Not sure who the wide receiver 3 is going to be, and it very likely could be a timeshare. Game 2 is Iowa taking on Kentucky, 3-point spread in favor of the Wildcats. One of my favorite bets of the week. 44 total, one of the worst on the boards here. Both teams super slow, super run heavy. For Iowa, very tough matchup, exacerbated by their running back Tyler Goodson opting out. Gavin Williams getting first reps in practice, but there have been some rumblings that Kelly Martin could start the game. They likely split work here. Slight preference to Gavin Williams. He's just a little more dynamic. Kelly Martin is explosive. He's usually on the kickoff returns and stuff, but should be a split backfield for a team with a 20-point implied team total. Petrus is the worst quarterback on the slate, 5K for him. He's not mobile whatsoever, negative 109 rushing yards, averages 150 through the air. That's very, very bad. The only player that is even somewhat interesting is Keegan Johnson, who's come on strong of late. 6.8 targets per game over the last 4. He's only 4K. He's still behind like Sam Laporta in terms of receiving yards in the year. Laporta is their tight end, but Johnson's been so involved that he's got to be their de facto number 1 receiver at this point. Reganey, Charlie Jones, Arlen Bruce, they'll be ancillary options. Tyrone Tracy hit the transfer portal, so he's not a threat anymore. Kentucky, Will Levis is the signal caller. And this team actually is intact. They have not had any announcements of opt-outs, which is positive here. Levis mobile. He has 387 yards on the ground, averages 215 as a passer. And the only worry here is Iowa's just super slow. See, what Levis requires pace up teams on the other side sometimes to reach his ceiling, which we will not see. But Wandale's still here, allegedly. 11.8 targets per game over the last 4, averages nearly 100 yards receiving. He's used as a rusher at times as well. And Josh Ali's hurt, so he's not going to play in the game, potentially condensing targets further for Wandale. But more than likely, that just puts Isaiah Cummings into a full-time role. Cummings averages 3.3 targets per game over the last 4, and he played a larger role when Ali went down earlier in the year. He's so cheap that I don't really see the need to mess with tight end Justin Rigg or ancillary receivers, Isaiah Epps or Rashawn Lewis. I'm pretty much just going to play Cummings if it comes down to playing a punt Kentucky receiver. In the running game, Chris Rodriguez, he handles like a 70% backfield share around there. You'll see Cavassier smoke and Jutan McClain handle change of pace duties. But for the most part, it's Chris Rodriguez. Chris Rodriguez is at 106 yards per game on average, somewhat active as a receiver. he's a pretty decent play here. And it's based on the fact that he's his favorite. Iowa's defense doesn't scare you. They've played well at times. They have good ancillary numbers on paper, but they've been really beaten up by teams that are strong in the run game like Wisconsin. Whenever they make that jump to superior competition, they fail. So Rodriguez is still in play, in my opinion. Notre Dame taking on Oklahoma State, 2-point spread in favor of the Irish, a 45 total, another poor total on the board. I promise we have some good ones down the stretch here, but both teams fairly fast. Oklahoma State in particular plays way up tempo. They're just run heavy with dual threat quarterback Spencer Sanders. Notre Dame is balanced. And Jack Cohn is under center. He will cede snaps occasionally to Tyler Buckner, who's a dynamic dual threat. He's been explosive and averages 7 yards per carry, but he just doesn't play a full complement of snaps. And he sees enough to really render Cohn unusable. Cohn needs 100% of the snaps and production through the air to overcome his negative sack yardage. That's just not going to happen with Buckner ceding some of the snaps here. Backfield, they lose Kyron Williams, so it's going to be Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs, expecting Tyree to handle more of the work. Tyree's opportunity decreased midseason because of an injury, but it has since spiked back up. Tyree is an explosive playmaker. He's used on kick returns, and he's very active as a pass catcher too, so he kind of fills the Kyron mold. I think he's a strong play here, very efficient as well. Diggs should be a change of pace. In the receiving game, they lost Avery Davis midseason, torn ACL, but no real opt-outs here, transfers. Mayer's still not draft eligible, so he'll be there as the tight end. Kevin Austin's taken on an enormous role without Avery Davis. These are the two players you want to prioritize if stacking, but Braden Lenzy and Lorenzo Styles are both very cheap if you're just going the cheap route with these two guys. It's not the best stack overall, but you could see some upside. It's a very tough matchup for Notre Dame across the board. OK State plays good D. For the Cowboys, Spencer Sanders is your dual threat quarterback, 543 yards on the year as a rusher. He averages 205 as a passer. And the ceiling games for Sanders are few and far between. He's typically middling in both categories as kind of your game manager plus. But Sanders overall, he's somewhat cheap here. I think you could get to him in some builds. Where you really want to look at with OK State is the run game. It's just been hard to get to with Jaylen Warren getting injured throughout the year. Previously this year, he was handling like 30 carries a game. But since the injury, his role has decreased, and we saw him miss the Big 12 championship. When that happened, Desmond Jackson carried 18 times. Dominic Richardson carried 7 times. Exacerbating issues, Desmond Jackson hit the transfer portal. We've seen some guys play who are in the portal, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would suggest not playing Desmond and instead look at Richardson, who should handle change of pace work. Richardson had a pretty decent roll down the stretch as well here, and LD Brown's not expected back, but both of these guys are cheap enough to take looks at. I'll be throwing darts at both in tournaments. In the receiving game, it's been basically locked between Tay Martin, Brennan Presley, and Blaine Green. These are the 3 receivers. They're on the field almost every play. Tay Martin averages 10.8 targets per game over the last 4. Green and Presley, both semi-involved. Green actually a little bit more of late, so he's 3,400. He would be the player to look at if just punting an OK State receiver at this point. But I think that is it overall for the offense. You have Richardson playing the tight end position if you want to get a little cute, throw some darts. He's been involved of late, just very volatile. Ohio State taking on Utah, 64-point total. So this is clearly the game we want to be targeting for DFS, along with the finale we'll get to in a second. Ohio State 4-point spread. That's because they've had a lot of opt-outs. We'll get to that. Utah, very strong team overall. They're run heavy. They're a little slower. Ohio State's the exact opposite, slightly above average in terms of pace and pass rate. CJ Stroud's still there, not draft eligible, not mobile, but a guy that averages 351 passing yards per game. Utah's played phenomenally down the stretch, but they're in a weak conference. So CJ Stroud still should be able to do some work here. The main issue is you had Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave both opt out. So how does this receiving core look without these players? One guy we know for sure is not leaving is Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is going to handle an absurd workload. He's actually their leading receiver on the year anyway. So it's a very strong spot to target him. And then from there, you should see Julian Fleming and Marvin Harrison play more snaps than some of these other ancillary receivers. G. Scott is a candidate to rotate in, but overall, we've seen Julian Fleming play a pretty decent role. Julian Fleming had 6 targets in a game where Garrett Wilson missed earlier this year. There was actually their 4th most recent game. Harrison had 4 targets in that game as well. It's that game that really suggests to me that both Fleming and Harrison should get good looks because we don't have Wilson or Olave. A place where we don't have opt-outs is the run game, where Trevion Henderson is still there. He should be in line for lead back work. Mayan Williams and Master Teague's actually healthy now. So Teague probable to play. He's had a good role for this team at times this year. He's the stone min. So if you're punting a running back spot, love Teague as a change of pace tournament option. But ultimately, you have Fleming and Marvin Harrison at 38 and 3K as well. So there's tons of Ohio State punt options. Expect them to be popular. Henderson, he's a good play in a vacuum himself. On Utah, the matchup's a little better than probably what the defensive numbers suggest on the Ohio State side because they have so many opt-outs. Rising's been phenomenal. He's mobile, 407 yards on the ground. And that it doesn't even factor in Charlie Brewer's start of the first couple games of the year. Rising only averages 190 passing yards per game, but he's only throwing the ball 25 times. It's because they've just been able to run over opponents and use Rising efficiently. In the run game, Tavion Thomas leads a backfield that also uses TJ Pledger, Micah Bernard. These guys will receive change of pace work, but this is going to be Tavion Thomas's job to lose, and he's going to be the lead back for the foreseeable future and in this game in particular. So he makes a lot of sense here as a slight underdog, a guy that can catch the ball a little bit. He's typically not used as a receiver, but it was nice to see him get a target in their last game. In the receiving game, Britton Covey entered the draft, not expecting him to play, but you never know. Brant Kuthi, he's a very strong receiving option, leads the team in receiving yards. He plays the tight end position, just a dynamic receiving threat from that alignment. He can play in the slot. He can play in line. He can really do everything for you. Dalton Kincaid is another guy they use at tight end. They go two tight ends quite a bit. And then they rotate Devon Vele, Solomon Enos, even Theo Howard. It's a rotation at the receiver position. Even Covey's rotated on an awful lot. And again, we don't know if Covey's going to play. Baylor taking on Ole Miss, a 55.5 total, second highest on the board to close things out. Baylor's super slow, super run heavy. Ole Miss is the exact opposite, so the clash of styles will be interesting to see who wins out. Jerry Bohannon's back starting for Baylor. Blake Shappen is injured. Bohannon somewhat mobile, 301 yards on the ground this year, averages nearly 200 as a passer, just shy of that on 23 attempts. The 23 attempts says it all. They do not like to air the ball out. They prefer to run with Abram Smith and Tristan Ebner. Abram Smith is handling much larger opportunity of late. It's basically 2/3 Abram Smith, 1/3 Tristan Ebner of late. And Ebner is the preferred pass catching back. Ebner actually averages 4.5 targets per game over the last 4. So he does play that role, but Smith has taken on a much larger share of the backfield in terms of raw rush attempts. They're underdogs here by 1.5 points, but that suggests to me that they still should be able to get it done. Very good matchup as well. Ole Miss allowing 183 yards per game on the ground. In the receiving game, 30% target share player Daquan Thornton averages only 7.3 targets per game, speaking to how little Baylor passes. He's mid-price, so you could definitely look at him as a run back. RJ Sneed's the 2, Drew Estrada's the 3, and Ben Sims is the tight end, and they don't really use anybody else, so they're all in play at their respective prices. Drew Estrada's a guy who's actually been involved a lot of late, so probably just going down to play him at 3,200, if not getting to Thornton. For Ole Miss, Matt Corral's going to play in the game. Love to see it. Lane Kiffin getting his guys to rally behind him. Corral, best quarterback play on the slate overall, outside of maybe Stroud. He is expensive, but he's also extremely mobile, 600 yards on the ground, averages 278.5 as a passer and 32 attempts. Volume's there for Corral. It's just a somewhat difficult matchup for him. But working in his favor, all of his receivers are healthy for one of the first times all year. Dontario Drummond's been injured. Braylon Sanders has been injured. Jonathan Mingo's been injured. They're all back. Prior to the injuries, Drummond was the 1, Mingo was the 2, Braylon Sanders was a somewhat distant 3rd, and now Ja'Cory Peterson's just too expensive for his projected role as a timeshare player. Same with John Rice Plumlee. It's overall going to be Drummond 1, Mingo 2, Sanders 3. All of them stacking viable. In the run game, they've kind of phased out Henry Parrish a little bit here, which is really interesting. Parrish had been involved all year long, but recently it's been just Jerry and Ely and Snoop Connor. If you can get this backfield reduced to 2 players, far more palatable than the third option, Parrish, being involved. Connor's really cheap, and Baylor plays strong defense, but Ole Miss still the favorite. These guys will catch passes. The offense runs so many plays that these are guys you still want exposure to. But that's the slate. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back with the final few bowl games we have. Let me know in the comment section who your favorite plays are. Otherwise, I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you again next time.